Hello, 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 hello. This is Nicholas Say. The Nicholas Say podcast monologue series continues. Where is it going? Where will it end? I don't know. I'm going really casual this week. I picked up a new job that requires me to work on a daily basis. I mean, I always work on a daily basis, but it's like a set time, and I can't remember the last time in my life that I had hours. I think it was when I was in Uruguay, working at a very famous winemaker and restaurant, working as a waiter. I did not last long as a waiter. It was a very nice place. Um, I can't really decide the link in description or not. I don't know what I'm going to say about these people yet, so I'm going to hold off on identifying it directly. But anyone who knows me knows what I'm talking about. And it was the first job I'd had since I left the United States. I mean, I had worked my ass off for many years on personal projects in Uruguay, and some things returned okay, some things didn't return much, especially given what I put into them. But my life in Rocha on the coast had ended, and I was moving on. Needed to work, needed an income, so I'd known the brand. It's a very, very famous one in South America, and especially with people who have money. And man, it was an experience. But that was probably the last time I had to show up for a shift. The last time I was given hours to work. And to be honest, I don't like it. I don't like being told that I have to come at this time, and that during that time I will do something. I mean, I don't mind working every day. That's okay. I mean, not every day. You should take 2 days off a week or have some pretty free form hours, at least two to 3 days a week. But the rest of the time, it's good to be productive, even if you don't need the money. Where I am now in Vietnam, I see a lot of people from the West come through, mostly from the States. Younger guys say they're retired. People who made money in the stock market, made money in cryptocurrency, although I don't know how they're holding on to much unless they sold a bunch of it. And they're quote unquote retired, and I always see them in bars. Of course, I'm in the bar too, so what does that tell you? But not that I really keep tabs on anyone. But no, I think you should be productive, but it's strange to me. It's strange especially as a creative. I can understand if I had taken on a work as a cleaner of some sort. Because 4 hours a day, go clean something. Yeah, I could. Sure. I need a couple 15-minute breaks in there, but I'll go do that for 4 or 5 hours a day. Clean something up, no problem. It's different when there's creativity involved. Although I suppose what I'm doing is not especially creative. That's a strange thing. Selling creativity is very odd. And there's some days when I just don't have much to say. You know, it's trying to come up with something, I suppose, but uh, at the same time, I think it forces me to channel a creative energy whether I want to or not. And that is perhaps worthwhile. I listen to a lot of I don't know if you'd consider it self-help or metaphysical philosophy. I don't know how. I mean, Alan Watts would fall into a gray area. Listening to someone like Ajahn Brahm, that's pretty much going to be straight up metaphysics, Buddhist religion, if you want to. I mean, you can consider it whatever you want to consider it. The word religion is an odd one to begin with. There's no procession of faith. As I get older, I think I was raised as a Christian, a Lutheran, and I did it for my mother. I had no other reason to do it. It was extraordinarily boring And I didn't like going to school during the week. I mean, my parents they had this great house, and they kept all these toys, and they kept trying to push me out of it and go fucking do stuff with other people. I couldn't be bothered. I didn't want to be around other people. People are terrible. And of course, they insist that it's necessary. And so Sunday school was just one more time when I was pushed out of the fucking house. And I mean, I can go along with secular education, whatever issues I might have, and I have many with the modern educational system, the way it's handled, the roots, the sort of blind obedience to what becomes sort of dogma. I mean, to me, real education is learning how to ask questions, learning how to produce your own inquiries, your own arguments. Define the words the way you want. Create your own worldview. That's, to me, the goal of education, is to question everything you've learned up to that point in a reasonable way, in a way that can be communicated. But that's not what it is. Anyway, I can go along with it because there's enough there. There's enough there to make it worthwhile. Enough people escape the sausage factory to continue the ongoing development of the human psyche. But going on Sunday morning to learn about goofball Bible stories, this is just the height of crap. I hated it. It got worse as I got older. I did not understand why it was so important to my mother. My father could care less about it. And that was another contentious point. I mean, why would my mother be so into religion and my father couldn't give a shit for it? And here I am, 10 years old, trying to figure it out. If something is, because the Abrahamic religions, they profess a truth. They're telling you the truth, and you must believe this. Though it relies on faith, so I have to believe something that relies on faith and offers me no evidence whatsoever. Well, it's not exactly hard to see how materialism took that out. I mean, what does it take, 10 minutes for anyone with two brain cells to rub together to realize that the Western metaphysic is a pile of crap? Now, that's not to say it can't help people. It can. But it can also be, it's also easy to understand why it fell apart as a worldview and left very little in its wake. And so now we have this sort of very, very precise worldview, and it's become global because it is the most functional way to interact with the environment as we understand it. But it's devoid of any spirit. I mean, and to me, the spirit, what is thought of as the inner world in the Cartesian system, the world of the inside, that is the real world. You call me an introvert if you want. I don't care. I think that those systems are misunderstood anyway. I've read a lot of Jung as well. I think that ultimately, at our most basic level, we're violent. We're violent creatures. And so any system that provides us with the tools to be violent in the most effective way will be the most popular worldview. Much in the same way that, if you take one religion that says that you shouldn't reproduce, and another religion says, well, take as many wives as you want and reproduce till your dick falls off. Well, religion number 2, with the polygamy and the nonstop procreation, well, you know what? You give it a few generations, and all things being equal, they're going to take over the fucking world. I mean, that's just how it is. So it's the same idea, the kind of weapons that, an understanding of chemistry and metallurgy allows people to create, and now electronic warfare, the kind of weaponry, the kind of potentiality that creates for a society is unbelievable in a historical sense. I mean, you went from the sword and the trebuchet and maybe a cannon or two, unreliable cannon, to a cruise missile, an atomic bomb, and now drones. It's fascinating to see it in the lens of even recent history. I mean, the idea that something like a battleship or an aircraft carrier could be rendered obsolete with relatively inexpensive technology is absolutely unbelievable. But that's the world we live in now. and that is a direct result of the post Enlightenment materialist worldview. But as much as it has empowered um, humans to project violence in effective and terrifying and soulless ways. And I don't like to. After learning more about Buddhism, I don't know about the soul thing. I think it's mostly a linguistic thing, although they don't seem to go along with that. So whatever. But there's no empathy in it. There's no compassion. There's no. And this is probably going to be what I talk about tomorrow. This is maybe me laying the foundation for what leads me to research very basic concepts like logos and telos and teleology and purpose versus purposelessness. And I don't know if I would say that dealing solely with logos, that is to say with the nature of reality is really better or is really effective without seeing a purpose in it. The purposelessness of the materialist worldview is terrifying. It's horrible. It's soul destroying. Or if there is no soul, it destroys any chance of wise action. If you don't take a Buddhist view of it, there's no without a purpose. There is no wisdom. There cannot be wisdom without purpose. It simply can't exist. And so, I hope everybody is having a wonderful week. It's Monday for me. Last week in Da Nang for a while. Headed elsewhere. Somewhere else in Vietnam. And it's raining. That's all right. I like the rain. It drives the locals nuts. Nicholas Say Podcast. And hey, Nicholas Say gear is growing on Zazzle. I will include links to my shop, which currently has one t-shirt, although I'll make sure there's more stuff going up with my super easy to copy designs. So if you can't afford to buy a $30 t-shirt or a $50 hoodie, because I need to get paid, if you want my official from Zazzle gear, make it yourself. Doesn't bother me. You do the work, it's all yours. Have a great day. Hello. Hello, it is Nicholas Say, the Nicholas Say Podcast. And I did not get around to doing many monologues this week. It's Thursday. And I've been busy working for money. Working for money. But hey, I've been thinking about this Logos and Telos thing. I've been really spending a lot of my free time meditating on it, reading about it, and I don't want this to turn into some kind of Nick Say definition of what these two archaic terms dating back to ancient Greece mean. They've both been used for numerous things by many, many different people and organizations throughout time. So I'm not going to try to be a scholar on this. I'm going to be myself, and I'm just going to talk about what these concepts mean to me and who has used them that I've found meaningful, and also move into the idea that we have a worldview that is not meaning centric. It doesn't focus on meaning. We don't focus on how we feel or what things mean to us. We focus on an objective value, right? And I think it's very easy to see how logos and telos could be seen as contradictory, or at least as being competing ideas. Because logos has the idea of form. It has the idea of a rule. It has the idea of a construct. And I think for a long time it was used by the Christians in the sense of that which God had created. And God had made rules. God had an idea. God had a plan. And that plan could probably take on the moniker of the telos, right? So you had these rules, this form, and it was even many Christians, I think, all the early sects looked at Christ as the Logos, as the divine form of the universe, which is a very interesting concept and probably not one that is well understood in the modern age, uh, either in a psychological sense or in a religious sense by people who are practicing Christians. Not to fault them, it's a pretty esoteric concept, much like the transubstantiation of the Mass. It takes quite a while to get on board, and is a really revolutionary concept when you look at it in the time that it came about. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to focus on how Logos has become uh, the basis of our worldview, of the materialist worldview, because the materialist worldview was able to triumph over Christianity for the simple reason that it is more functional. It is a way of interacting with reality that allows people to knowingly act with a higher rate of success. So instead of an event being controlled by God or angels, we can say that it is controlled by physics or chemistry. And while the modern mind would say, well, there's no comparison between those things, they are in fact synonymous from the standpoint of a classification. Now, of course, there's a huge difference in the sense that physics and chemistry came about through the scientific method, process of trial, error, and then repeating that process for hundreds of years until we developed very specific systems of classification that function with a high rate of repeatability. That is, in essence, what science is. It is just a method of inquiry. And so the thing that was lost, the sort of the meaning behind, the goal of, the telos of God's divine plan, to use a Western standpoint, that has been stripped from anything that we have in our modern worldview. Excuse me. We no longer have anything that is connected to destiny, to feeling, to a subjective or internal aspect of how we view morality, how we view our day-to-day lives for many people. And there isn't a new system. Of course, there's New Age stuff. You know, a lot of the New Age stuff, as Terence McKenna kind of pointed out, was either recycled old nonsense or recycled religion, which happens a lot. It happens a lot to this day. People like, oh God, what was that guy? Bhagwan Rajneesh something. Had a long name, had a bunch of Rolls Royces. He ended up having to flee the States. Osho. And now you have like people like Eckhart Tolle who are, and at least they're giving credit where credit's due. Tolle is open about heavily borrowing from Buddhism and other Eastern philosophy, but it's not really new. You see, it's not really evolving. And anything that takes place within the modern psychological wrapper. Analytical psychology, therapy, which is okay. But again, we haven't really figured out how to transcend a what is essentially metaphysical doctrine. Modern materialist philosophy is a metaphysical doctrine. They take their worldview as pre-existing, unquestionable. They look for ways to make it reality instead of investigating it as though it wasn't true. It's a dogma in the same way that Christianity is a dogma, in the same way that even Buddhist principles have become dogmatic in the sense that they are seen to be true. The big difference when you compare something like modern materialist dogma to Buddhist dogma is that there are the Buddhists put a high value on things like specifically compassion. So Ajahn Brahm, just listened to a great talk by him where, he's usually very mellow when he's giving these Dharma talks. And he did it, I believe it was in Sri Lanka. He did a talk where he was very critical. And it was nice to hear him being critical of mindfulness being stripped from Buddhism and sort of retrofitted to modern psychology, which is seen in the same way as the physical medicines are, and that is unbelievably ridiculous. But it's accepted. And so his point was that when the Buddhists use mindfulness, they have supporting quote unquote technologies. They have supporting concepts that create balance within the mindfulness. Whereas when you take, and this is me saying it, not, I don't know if I didn't listen to the whole thing. Maybe he said something like, maybe Brahm said something like this, maybe he didn't. But when you take mindfulness, when you take an aspect of a thought system, of a metaphysical belief system like Buddhist thought, and then you isolate it and you use it very specifically, it has completely lost its role in what the Buddhists claim is a process that will lead to peace and enlightenment. And you see the exact same thing happening in yoga. Most Westerners don't know that yoga, the hatha yoga, the physical yoga, is really one of many types of yoga that were all meant to be used together. It's not, physical yoga is simply one aspect of a it is metaphysical, but it is also physical, that of a system that is meant to bring peace and health and happiness. But because the West, the European mind, has become so fixated on the logos, on the form, on the physical form, on the rules, they want everything they do to be applied directly to something that is quote unquote objective. Now, this is where things get a little bit insane, because physicality, as we understand it, is simply an abstraction. The forms that the mental forms that we use to describe our world, to describe the chemical elements, to describe things that exist, quote unquote exist. These are just abstractions. They are not necessarily real. Now, of course, in the modern age, we've gotten very good at creating abstractions, good in the sense that when we classify something, it appears, at least for the moment, to fall within those classifications and function as we say it will. Now, of course, this does not always happen. And as the 20th century went on, and as the 21st century has demonstrated, the almost 2 decades that we've lived so far in the new millennium, the scientific method went from a system of inquiry to a body of knowledge that is now being defended in the same way that a religious philosophy or a religious metaphysic would have been. So now ideas that are contrary to what is established scientific knowledge, which to me is a bit of an oxymoron, are given undue scrutiny and aren't really willing to be considered as viable theories if they oppose things like the laws of thermodynamics. And yet, there are many things within the world of science that aren't given necessary criticism. Subatomic physics is an example. And that's not to dissuade people from studying these ideas, but it is meant as a criticism in the sense that if the thought process within the scientific community continues along these lines, it will very shortly, within the next 50 years, become a dogma that will require the same kind of shift, a transcendence that that preceded the shift into science from Christian Europe. And here's where it really gets a bit more interesting to me. The thing that needs to be added is obviously what has been ignored, and that is the meaning of it, the telos, the purpose in it. Why are we doing this? Why are we trying to classify the world in such specific terms? Why do we want to act with such a high degree of a probability of success? Why are we so obsessed, and it is an obsession, with control? Why do we want that in our lives? Why do we put such a high value on our own ability to build and judge? Because if you take a look back through the Enlightenment, going back to the year 1600, the Western world has a pretty, and most of the countries, not just the West now, but they were the first ones to embrace these concepts, so they get hit the hardest by me. Why do they keep failing in such an epic way and yet still go back to the exact same concepts? The concepts of we can knowingly control creation. Of course you can. And when this actually happens, I mean, look at what happened. A recent example: Nazi Germany. He actually, not just Hitler, but of course everyone blames Hitler. But these Nazis, they got together and they said, "Well, look, we're going to create it. We're going to craft a purpose, right? Because it's obvious to anyone with a brain that our modern worldview is highly fractured and very lopsided." And so anyone who can stick a solid telos, a solid reason for doing it, a reason for meaning, they can attract quite a few people. And when the telos that is created, that is crafted, is destructive, well, it doesn't take much to see what kind of hell on earth it can create. And that's precisely what happened. And that's sort of the impetus to say, well, this just seems like some kind of weird philosophical discussion. It's not. It is, but it's not. It's very much a vital concept. It's far more vital than figuring out the nature of a black hole. It's far more vital than exploring parts of the deep sea with new crafts. It's more important than a new smartphone. It's more important than any new technological advancement. We need to have a meaning in what we already have. I mean, if processor speed stopped today, and we did not have another breakthrough in telecommunications for the next 20 years, for the next 100 years, we'd be fine. But what we do need, and we need it desperately, as a race, as the human race in toto, is first to acknowledge the beneficial nature of meaning, and secondly, ways to find meaning that are healthy and helpful. Now, I don't have answers for that, and I've been rambling on for almost 20 minutes now, so that is maybe the first exploration of Logos and Telos, because I think this is something that's not going to change in my lifetime, not meaningfully. And it's something that we need to work on. It's something that needs to be discussed. It's far more important than a music video or an economic theory or how far up or down a stock market went, because we are very literally at the edge of a precipice. I'll try to find the video. Very smart guy on YouTube talks about ensuring the continuity of the technology that we already have. We take it for granted because for most of our lifetimes, technology has just gotten better and better and better and better and better and cheaper, and everything's great. But there have been many times in history, Roman Empire, for example, when there was a long period where that happened, and then within 100 years, there's no plumbing. Nothing but war, right? And that's the kind of precipice that we could be facing over the next 100 years. It's not hard to see. So, Nicholas Say Podcast, doing it for the light, doing it for the love. hope everybody's having a great week. And, if you're one of the 6 or 10 people who listens to my podcast, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll be back.